Welcome everyone, and thank you for coming. It's so great to look out and see all these wonderful faces, all these supporters and artists and everything. I'm Diane Fraher. I'm from Osage and Cherokee Nations, and I was the founder of Amarinda. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the story of the book and the story of the movement with some of the people who started the movement, and talk about a vision for the future for contemporary Native art in all the disciplines. The book really, I'm a storyteller. I love stories, and so I know that all Native art tells a story no matter what discipline it is. It has to tell a story, and I knew that we had a wonderful story, the Native artists who had come to New York after the civil rights and social justice, and actually even stretching all the way back to the 1920s. Very brave, beautiful, talented Native women came here and established themselves in the performing arts in particular. There had been an extraordinary rich history of Native artists in New York City for quite some time that really had more than one blossoming, but in particular after civil rights and social justice. So that was the beginning of wanting to have us tell our story. And this is how it was. The book took 5 years in the making, at least over 2 years of research, and then writing after that, and photo edit and what have you. So it took quite an effort to do this. And at this point, I'd like to, which is our custom, I'd like to have Pete Jemison from Huron Clan of the Seneca, and ask him to do a blessing for all the artists and all the friends and people that are here, and those who are not here as well.
You can remain seated. If I could ask the gentlemen to remove their hats. And please no taping or photography while I'm doing this portion in my language. My language is Onundawatgagawano, the language of the people of the Great Hill. And after I say those words, I'll translate what I said. In our language, we start by giving thanks for the well-being of the people, that everyone has arrived here safely. And then we mentioned that it is our mother, the earth, that supports our feet all the days of our life as we walk about, and she continues to bring forth those gifts that sustain us. And then I mentioned the variety of water, the water that runs beneath the surface of the earth, water running over the surface, water that stands on the earth. We give thanks for all water. And then I mentioned that there are little creatures that are running around, four-legged animals. There's the large and the small both, and there's the birds that fly overhead, and we give thanks for their well-being. And then I mentioned that there's a medicine here that's a very important one to us. It's called the wild strawberry. We acknowledge and we gather together when it becomes ripe, in the month of June. And then I mentioned that as well, the Creator has seen fit to give us foods to sustain us. And they are the corn, the beans, and the squash, and we refer to them as the three sisters. After that, I also mentioned that there are trees and there are forests. And the leader of the trees for us is the great sugar maple, and I gave thanks for that and the gifts that it has brought forth earlier in the spring. And then I mentioned that we hear the sound of thunder, and when we hear that, we know that it's announcing the coming of rain, and we acknowledge and give thanks for that rain, and even the lightning has a role to play. And then I mentioned our elder brother, the sun. We call him a great warrior, and he has been providing the daytime light so that it's just right here on this earth, and we can live here. And then I mentioned our grandmother, the moon, that our grandmother, the moon, has responsibilities. She brings forth for women a cycle by which they can bring children into this world. And we acknowledge and give thanks to our grandmother as well. She controls the tides. I mentioned the stars that are arrayed about my grandmother in one particular constellation that we watch at this time so that we can set our ceremonial cycle at the midwinter of this year. And then I said that there were messengers that were sent here to give us instructions of how we are to live as human beings. We refer to them as the four messengers that have their hands on our shoulders. And I said it's a good-looking group that is here tonight, and it is a good-looking group. And I'm glad that you're all here. I also said that there's one leader who came among us with a message we call the good word, and we still live our lives according to that the best that we can. I said that I followed the Indian way of life, or the way of life of the real human being. In the words that I said here tonight, I did the best I could for the responsibility that was given to me. Donito.
Before we begin, I would like to say some thank yous. First of all, the book was supported in the beginning by a curatorial research fellowship from the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts. David received a curatorial research fellowship to do all of the research and beginning of the writing. We'd like to thank the Joan Mitchell Foundation for their support of the actual publication of the book. And we'd also like to thank the Leon Polk Smith Foundation for their recent donation, which will help us be able to distribute the books to the American Indian junior colleges, art history departments, and Native study departments throughout the country. So we want to thank all our funders. If there are any Native artists, prominent Native artists here, Native dignitaries, we welcome you tonight as being with us. And we thank the Board of Directors of Amarinda for all their hard work in supporting us, because this was, as I said, a 5-year project that went on quite a bit past when it was funded. And then we want to thank Artist Space for their generosity and support. It's really been a wonderful experience to work with them. A lot of our people still, and certainly Amarinda, certainly still faces discriminatory and exclusionary behavior from white organizations, non-Native organizations. So it was just a wonderful experience to be able to work with you. Your generosity towards us and your respect for us was really unparalleled. We thank you. And I'd also like to, before we begin introducing the panel, we have an elder Native artist here tonight, Gloria Miguel. She and her sisters, Muriel and Elizabeth, who is no longer with us, but she's with us in spirit tonight, are the mothers, the grandmothers of contemporary Native theater, which started here in New York. And so I want to thank you for coming here, Gloria, and acknowledge your presence. And now I would like to turn to the wonderful people, the artists that are with me here, and introduce them. Jaune Smith is almost needs no introduction. She's one of my heroes. I'm so honored and pleased to have her with us here tonight. She is one of the artist curators that really helped to develop the most recent emergence of the movement. Athena next to her is sitting Athena LaTocha, who represents the current generation, the generation going forward of artist curators. And then Peter Jemison, we call him Pete Jemison, who is also, like John, one of the founding artist curators of the movement. And then last but not least, David Martine, who is also an artist curator and of course the author of the book. So to begin the discussion tonight, and it's going to be more like a conversation because we wanted it to be less formalized and more intimate, while we have the presence of all these people here to share with us. The New York movement is the story of, certainly in the visual arts, of artist curators who have had an individual artistic vision and cast a wide net to gather other Native artists together with them and tell a story that was grounded in traditional Native values and fully embedded in the community. So I'd just like to open up the discussion to begin with, to have there are two people who are not with us tonight, who were founders of the movement, and perhaps Pete and Jaune could share some recollections of these two people. The first person is Leon Polk Smith. Leon Polk Smith was a Native person, part Native person, who came here from Oklahoma and established himself very successfully as an artist, in beginning I think he came to New York in 1937 when he first came here. Anyway, he was a man who was very, very supportive of the emergence of contemporary Native artists and played an important role also in supporting Lloyd Oxendine, who was the first artist curator who actually ignited the flame. And so I'd like to just pass the microphone and people can start talking.
I think that I'm the one on the panel who actually knew Leon and who visited Leon, both at his home on Long Island and at his studio near Union Square. And I first met Leon in 1972. He was a supporter of Lloyd Oxendine when he opened the gallery, which ultimately became known as American Art, at 133 Wooster in Soho. And Leon helped Lloyd at that time. I called upon Leon also to help me to curate an exhibit when I became the director of the American Indian Community House Gallery in 1978. And he came there to 38th Street, where the gallery was located, 10 East 38th Street. And so I saw him periodically. I eventually moved the gallery to Soho, to 386 West Broadway, and at that time, Leon and his partner Bob would come and visit periodically. It was always great to see them. As a side, Leon used to say, "One good nosebleed and there goes my Indian blood." So he never really, promoted himself as a native artist, but he certainly recognized that he grew up in Oklahoma Territory, and he certainly knew that, he was a native person by birth, basically. But what I really, enjoyed about him is he was always, to me, very positive, very supportive, always had a very keen eye, looked very carefully at any art that was on the wall, and was very thoughtful about his comments about the work that he saw. And, that felt good for a person who was, curating exhibits and wanting to gather good art together, and, and to feel that a person like he, who had, such a fine eye and great sense of color and design, and I hope that you know his work. He did one of the series that I really love of Leon's work is called The Constellations, and these are these shaped canvases and that are joined together. His partner Bob was a master carpenter, and they built these beautiful combination of stretchers and canvases that really showed Leon's work to a perfect way. So those are the things that kind of stand out in my mind. And this summer I had the good fortune of going to see Leon's work again, where it is being carefully kept, preserved, and in some cases restored. And it was great to go there to see the work this summer, and then also to have a chance to kind of snoop through Leon's library. I was never sure what all he was reading or whatever he looked at, but I got a little glance at it, just for my own personal interest. And so I'm glad that his work is still being shown. It's being shown in Chelsea, and I think that he deserves that. And I hope that his reputation will continue to grow.
He was my shadow supporter. When I started in Soho in 1978, in the Jill Cornblee Gallery, that wasn't in Soho, that was at Midtown. He would always show up at every exhibition that I did, and he would leave a message in the book for me. And it was always some complimentary, nice thing with explanation. And they said he would come into the exhibit and he would stay a long time. He'd look at the work carefully, and then he'd write in the book. And then I would ask if I could meet him, and they would say, "Oh no, he's really shy." So I never got to meet him. He was just my shadow supporter.
Well, I never knew, he was before my time somewhat. I remember most strongly Lloyd Oxendine, of course, and I believe we found that Mr. Leon Polk Smith supported greatly Lloyd's work and in bringing out the best of Native American contemporary art in his gallery, and trying to find opportunities for the Native American community and the contemporary artists to succeed in New York City, because he had seemed to find that there were few and far between opportunities, for either the curators didn't understand Native American art, or the writers were misinterpreting what they saw. they weren't able to get gallery space, and Lloyd was very strong about the fact of trying to promote and give opportunities to as many people as he could. And it seemed like they were a good pair. They really worked together to bring forward the whole movement, back in the early days. So.
I wanted to go back to Lloyd for a minute. I met Lloyd in 1971 at what was then called the Museum of the American Indian. It was at 155th Street and Broadway, and not a lot of people went there to see that museum at the time, but they also had a research branch in the Bronx, and many different artists went there to look at those collections over the years. Lloyd, when I met him, we were both in an exhibit that was curated by two friends of mine, Susan Krause, who became Susan Krause Martin, and her husband, Tom Martin, were acting curators for the Museum of the American Indian, and they put together a show, the first one of contemporary Native artists that ever had been in that gallery, or that museum, back to the 1930s, perhaps. But at any rate, Fritz Scholder, Neil Parsons, George Morrison, Lloyd, and myself were in that show. And Lloyd said to me at the time that he was planning on opening a gallery in Soho, and he asked if I would want to show there and invited me to show there. I was very excited about that opportunity. It was something brand new. And sure enough, he opened, again in Soho at, as I said earlier, on Wooster. And, I did a one-person show there. I participated in group shows. The big thing with Lloyd was and it was celebrated here, the 1972 article in Art in America, which was absolutely the first of its kind. And, Lloyd had the chance to write that. Ryan O'Doherty let him write the article without him editing. Lloyd chose the artists, and he wrote the article. And, that summer of 1972 was high times, very exciting. Native American Theater Ensemble got a very encouraging review in the New York Times, plus the magazine coming out. It seemed to us at the time that the movement was really going to take off. It probably lasted a few months. I can't remember for sure. But this has been our fate. It's kind of been a up and down. Sometimes very, very exciting, and sometimes very good, like tonight. And then sometimes, we're just wondering what's happening. Why isn't anyone interested, or why don't they understand even now?
David, do you have anything to say about Lloyd, too, individualistic?
Well, in doing the book, I wanted to bring out some of the background history, of course, of some of these people who were so central to the New York Native American art movement. In the visual side, when we began the book, it was going to be primarily about the visual artists, and I knew I had exhibited a number of times with Lloyd back in the 80s, and I always admired his tenacity and his determination his seriousness rather, of bringing forward Native American art and getting people to understand what it was all about, that it just wasn't craft, it just wasn't something to be relegated to the Natural History Museum, or something that would take its place side by side with the best of contemporary art across the world. And so that I always never forgot that. I got to know him personally very, very well, and it was fun to put it in the book about how he first came to the city and wanted to bring forward a lot of these things from his background that was new. He was a trailblazer, he was a real good trailblazer. And it was just fun to get into his life and to bring it forward to people. He didn't have the recognition he should have had, in my opinion. A lot of these people, they're the greatest artists in the world on the Native American art side, and they don't have the recognition that should be right up there with everybody else, with the greatest abstract expressionist people. But then we luckily we added the professional performing arts side, which has a tremendous history here in New York, as Diane alluded to, the beginning of the performing arts in Native American contemporary world here in New York, and that was fun to put in the book also. So that's basically it.
I didn't meet Lloyd until my graduate years, studying at Stony Brook University. And during the time, I was taking a class called Social Tumult in the 60s and 70s. And we were studying a lot of the artists, and there was a large focus on black artists, and the political protests and women's arts movements. And I became very curious, just from my own background and my own questioning, who I am, where I come from. I was wanting to look a little bit more closely and see if there was anything out there about Native American art in New York City in the 60s and 70s. And I'm a transplant. I'm originally from Alaska, and my exposure to the New York art scene has been very limited until I actually moved here. So it was that researching at that time when I was in grad school that uncovered a lot of information and kept leading me back to Lloyd Oxendine. His name kept coming up. And I was speaking with a very good friend at the time, and he said, well, I know Lloyd. He works at the powwow booth next to me. And I thought, oh, wow, that's really amazing. So when I went out to the powwow the next time, it might have been one of the Shinnecock powwows or one of the other Pequot or one of the other powwows in the area, I was introduced to Lloyd and went out to him and said, Mr. Oxendine, I read your article in the 1972 edition of Art in America, and I'd like to talk to you more about what you were going through and your ideas about that time. And he was very, very open to talking about this, and he said he invited me to come over and meet with him in his home on the Upper West Side at the time. So, and I felt incredibly humbled because here, who am I? I'm this student, and here's this big person in the history. And so I went up and talked to him, and it was interesting when I first met him and started talking to him because there was this twinkle in his eye when he smiled, and there was like something mischievous there, in a good way, right? Because he was, and he. It wasn't about, when I first asked him, honestly, about the article and wanting to know more about this article from 1972, he just looked straight back at me and he said, well, that's the past. What are we going to do moving forward? Why do we keep looking backwards? And that made an impact on me, thinking about and where I am and what my work was about. And prior to going to grad school, I was looking at how do I come to terms and how do I understand my own background, where I come from, and the power and the significance of that, the history of culture, and the misinformation that's out there, and all the stories that need to be told, that should be told, and who gets the time to do that, who gets the stage time.
Can I back up just a minute here? I think that I think it would be good just to back up a little bit in history. In the Southwest, it became a place where the government sent rich white women out to the Southwest. In the turn of the century and then on into the 1920s, into the 1950s. And it was thought that Native Americans weren't smart enough to become engineers or doctors or even to become educated. So it was thought by the government that Indians should just make crafts, that that's all we could possibly manage. And so they hired a woman named Dorothy Dunn, who came to the Southwest to the school now today called American Indian, the IAIA, the Institute of American Indian Arts, which is now a college. But in those days, Dorothy Dunn taught a kind of Bambi school of art. There was a whole style of painting that evolved out of that. And not a lot of our families went to college. My family didn't even go through high school, let alone college. So for a lot of us, we were the first in our families to go to high school and then to go to college. And for us to come to New York City to be part of the art scene was just not something that we were raised with. that wasn't an idea in our families. So for those of us, the Colorado sisters, Guy, Diane Fraher, Steve, for all of us who came here, we were kind of like renegades. We were like wild Indians, because coming here, we were not, we were not accepted by the art community. And I remember George Morrison telling me when he went to the Cedar Bar to hang out that he just let people think he was Jewish. And that was true for a lot of us. A lot of people thought if they saw us or they hung out with us that we were Jewish, and it was better to let them think we were Jewish than to think we were Indian, because Indians were kind of dumb and people kind of looked down on us. That's how I was raised, is being looked down on. So you tried to hide it if you could. We were ashamed of it. And I see Vera's nodding at me. So we have some of the Indians here in this audience tonight who came here, who did this thing. And so in the 1970s, when we left the Southwest, or we left the West and we came here to New York, we were like really like individuals. We came together at the American Indian Community House with Peter. And Peter became like a gathering place. Lloyd kind of mentored him, and Peter took over, and we began doing exhibitions. I brought exhibitions into New York. I brought the first traveling woman's exhibition in the country. I brought the first traveling photograph exhibition in the United States to New York, to Pete. And it was a gathering place. Indians came out of the woodwork. Indians that we didn't even know came here. It was the glue that held us together. That, if David wants to call it a movement, that was the movement, because we came from all places. And I remember there was like 140 tribes one time when we counted the tribes that came here. So that was a really exciting time, and we thought we were like breaking ground, and we were really going someplace, and we could acknowledge that we were Indians. It was okay. We could be proud of ourselves, and it was okay. And they were doing theater at La Mama Theater, and they could be Indians, and it was okay. This was like a new thing for us to let people know that we were Native Americans. And even though we were from all these different tribes, like we got into the elevator one day, and there was Jolene and me and Pete and Jesse Kude, and we're from all these different tribes, and this white guy got in and looked at us, and he said, "What are you guys? Some kind of Asians or something?" And we said, "Yeah." We just didn't want to go into the whole explanation of how we got here and how we're maybe mixed bloods and how we're from these different tribes, and it was too hard to explain to him. But we knew, and I remember being in Pete's gallery when Floyd Westerman came in and played at night, and we're there looking at the skyline here in New York, and we're all there rocking together. I mean, we thought we were like really making change. And this was through the 1970s. So Jamaica Highwater's books came out, and we thought, oh, that's really great. Now they'll know who we are. Nah. And then, and then we came to Pete's gallery, and we started moving these shows in and out. Nah, that didn't change anything. Then we went through the 80s, and it was multi-culti time, and we thought, okay, we'll join with the African Americans, we'll join with the Asians, we'll join, and then we'll be stronger. Nah, that didn't. And then we hit 1992, and it was the year of the Indian again, and yeah, we were gonna do it. Nah, it lasted 5 minutes, and now it's the year of Standing Rock. She's from Standing Rock. Yeah, and it's probably going to last through the year, and then
We're going to make it last longer this time. I want to tell real quick. I can't help but tell funny stories, sort of. The first time that Jaune organized a group called Great Canyon, the show was shipped to New York, and the gallery was still up on East 38th Street. And we had a person from the Met who was really wanting to help and really wanting to make things good, for us. And so she decided to take the responsibility for bringing that show in, working with Jaune, Larry Emerson, Paul Willetto, Emmy Whitehorse, Conrad House. I think all of those people, of course, Jaune was in the show. So opening night came, and the entire show was sitting on a loading dock in Chicago, not in the gallery on the night of the opening. Some snafu and a snowstorm, okay. So I sent the person from the Met, I said, you've got to go out there and explain to people. She goes, no, not me, no. I said, yes, you. So she went out and explained to everyone. It was the woman with the full-length mink that really got me, that, we did have a few slides that we were able to show, I think, and then the show arrived shortly after that, maybe in the early part of the next week. But those were some of our adventures and misadventures, and, it's just part of the whole scene. And we had many, many successes, though. Jaune didn't get yet to one called Women of Sweetgrass Theater and Sage, which really got a lot of attention. That was a really good women's show. And we were able to bring in artists that we hadn't previously been able to show.
The photograph show you kept it at the second month.
Yeah.
Because I had been looking for 5 years for photographs by Native Americans. And I could only find Little Brownie snapshots, and so finally I just started with that. Little Brownie snapshots, and it would be like an old wooden table with a piece of oilcloth on it, a sack of bluebird flower, and a John F. Kennedy calendar hung high on the wall. And you knew that was a HUD house. You knew it could have been in Florida. It could have been in New York. It was a real Indian home. And nobody else knew that except us. And so when I talked to the museums and the galleries about it, they would say, huh? An oilcloth on a table and you know that's an Indian house? Oh yeah, we knew that was an Indian house. So we started out with that, and I brought it to New York, and Pete said, the guy in the New York Times asked, what's so different about Indian photographs from other people's photographs? And I told the guy, I said, listen, if you saw, a candelabra on the table, what's it called? The candelabra?
The candelabra?
Yeah, the Jewish one.
Oh, the menorah.
If you saw a menorah on the table, you would know that's a Jewish household. Well, this is the same thing. And he said, okay, I'll review it, I'll tell people to come.
I think the difference, what we really was the difference, was that instead of people depicting us, we were depicting ourselves. We were telling our own story. We had the camera in our hands. That's the big difference. And that is, I did a show for a place called the Birchfield Penny Arts Center in Buffalo, and I looked at the whole history of the images that have been done by photographers of us, from the Curtis photographs. The one that really struck me and still stays with me was Geronimo in the year 1901 was literally a display in Buffalo, and he had a ball and a chain on his ankle, and he sat there whittling, a bow, and this was how he was portrayed. That he was captured, and and he was part of this past that had to be destroyed in order for America to become, I don't know, the dominant force in the universe or something like that. This is really crazy, but they spent a lot of time and a lot of money chasing him down. And then when they went after Osama bin Laden, they named that Geronimo. The whole thing was called Geronimo, ironically, I guess, or sadly.
So it's interesting that you mentioned, because my grandfather, of course, he was Apache, and he was a prisoner of war at Fort Sill. They were held prisoners of war for 28 years. I think it's the only native nation where the women and children are also held prisoners of war. But that was during the time, after that period, he was there, and he went to the boarding school, of course, if you go into that history, where a lot of the children were removed from their families and so forth, and went to these military schools. But with the Chiricahua Apache tribe, the Fort Sill Apaches, they lost more children and people in prison than they did, fighting the cavalry and running through running for their lives, trying to defend their lands and so forth, because of the bad water and poor nutrition and the climate and what have you. But my grandfather, he always remembered, he was a football player, and he went to school at Hampton Institute and finally came and married my grandmother, the Shinnecock Reservation here on Long Island. So he took a long journey from the West. But that goes to show you that the history is very recent, you know, that a lot of these history books, these people like Geronimo and a lot of these people that are icons in Native American history, it's not that long ago, you know, it's not just mythology, it's reality, you know. A lot of descendants today are living and breathing, and that's one of the interesting things about Native American culture in general, is that people have a hard time realizing that we're not just a stereotype. We're not just movies and TV and something, a romanticized thing that's mythology. You know, we're actually living and breathing and have a culture alive today in New York City. And, you know, it's even this late date, you know, you never know when you're going to confront a lot of really ignorant, ridiculous things, even in theater, the depiction of Native Americans in theater, which is something that confronting these stereotypes is one of the things that we do in Amarinda, or have had to do, where you have theater companies that don't want to hire Native American actors. You know, they'll go ahead, even to this very day, and they'll put someone in painted, you know, makeup and pretend that they're Native Indian people, and they'll try to say, well, they have this idea that we're artists, you know, we can take artistic license, and they say, oh, we're so sorry, we didn't realize that we were insensitive, you know, we're so carried away with our piece here that we're going to, you know, have someone in makeup rather than hire native people, or have some weird depiction. So it's all rolled into one, you see. You know, the whole idea of trying to get clarity and analysis, accurate analysis of the art. And this is one of the things we wanted to bring out in the book. You know, I wanted to get into a little bit of interpretation and analysis of the work, and to make the culture more of a viable reality rather than just a stereotype.
See, I want everybody to know that since the Community House Gallery isn't functioning, that everybody is like doing other stuff, so we don't stop. Like,
Jaune,
you know,
talk directly
say
into the
that.
mic. So
Peter,
Please.
I want to quickly, since Peter left the community house, I just want everybody to know, Peter went home to his reservation. He's built a $15 million museum, and he raised the money himself. He helped do the design. He also helped the program called NAGPRA, which is returning Native American things from the museums to the reservations, to the reservation museums. And then Peter discovered that they had arsenic and mercury in them. Peter's been dealing with that for all of our tribes, not just his tribe, but for all clear across the country. We are all dealing with the same things. Peter was one of the founders of that legislation. Peter has been continuing on his mission to make life better for all Native Americans, and that's not just for his tribe, but, you know, I really commend him because, you know, knowing him in those days and the things he was doing at the community house to bring all of us together here in New York, and now, since then, he's continued to be a great leader in this country, so we're really fortunate to have Peter here. And same for Diane, too. She's been here in the city, her and Steve, you know, continuing to do things for Native Americans here, hoping that they could get a larger space where we could gather together again here in the city. And so far that hasn't happened, even with the emphasis on natives this year. So we have our fingers crossed, our prayer sticks, we're hoping.
I think it's important that people see that the thread that runs through things is that Native people as artists, it was not about ambition, it was about having a vision and wanting to achieve that vision. That's different than ambition. Ambition is usually driven more by money, ego, attention. But all of the artists, the Native artists of the New York movement, both performing, the writers, the visual artists, everyone, okay?
Spider women.
Multidisciplinary people, everything. It was always about an individual artist who had a particular vision, and then they cast a wide net and gathered other Native people artists with them. And as a result, it was much more powerful, and the vision was achieved, and that vision gave birth to other visions, and that's basically what's still going on here. Is still happening with people, and still, like John's saying, in people's lives as people go on, not just in New York, but whatever work they're doing. And this was true all the way back. What made it so powerful is that kind of a Indians see themselves as related to one another. And so people, for example, when I came to New York, my grandparents said that find where the Indians are because that's your family. And so I did. And that's been my family when I was here all this time. I have my family back in Oklahoma and my tribe there, and I'm there too, go there. But the Indian people, once I found them, this was my family here. And I think that's true all the way back of Native artists coming here, even to the teens, the women, these brave, beautiful women that did it then, that they would find one another and they would form almost like a family relationship, and out of this, so many things really happen. So,
that was my experience when I was getting to know Lloyd, and I didn't get to know him very well because he passed away just prior to my getting to know him. And that kind of openness that he expressed, and the looking forward, what are we going to do? He asked, but let's do something. And similarly with Jaune here, Jaune reached out, and looking at what other Native artists are doing, looking at what other folks are doing is very important. To help balance your own self. When I was struggling with these ideas in graduate school, and not having a lot of places to look, being able to look out and see what other Native artists were doing and how they were working through their own ideas, their own perspectives, their understanding of their place in the world, it provided a lot of grounding for me and a lot of confidence for me to be able to do the same with my own work. So I'm incredibly grateful for the Native community that's been here in New York City and other far-reaching communities out in the Albuquerque area.
Before it gets much later, I would like to acknowledge a person that worked on our books, a tremendous editor by the name of Jennifer Tromsky. Could you stand up, Jennifer? She's the editor of our book, No Reservation. Yeah, there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into that book, I'll tell you. I'm not a professional author, but we did the best that we could, and I think it's something that we wanted to put something on paper because there was so much going on here in New York City, and it seems like you hear more about Native American activities around the United States than you do right here in New York City, and it's that I appreciate it, Jennifer, for all the work, Thank you.
I think we should also say, though, I hope people can hear me with this, I guess. Anyway, also too, she's not here tonight, but Claudia Brandenburg, who did the book design, did a wonderful job for us, and Lisa Kahan, who did the copy edit for us, was just a Herculean effort. So I want to thank those people also. They were a big part of it. We couldn't have done it without them any more than with the funders. So I just wanted to have Jaune talk a little bit, if she could. I said a couple more things I think it's important to share. For Jaune to talk about when the Gray Canyons shows that she organized in her work with Pete, because as Pete said, during his years as the director of the Community House Gallery. And if you could share just a little bit about that.
My favorite story is the one Peter told about bringing Gray Canyon to New York. It was a group of Indians in Albuquerque, and we were all university-trained Indian people. And when I went to the galleries to see if they would do a show with Gray Canyon, they asked, what kind of art is that? And like one of the artists had figures like George Siegel's white that laid on the floor. They were drunk Indians in the city, and they said, no, that we won't show that. And then each of us had something like that, and they didn't. I had robes. I called them robes, and they were cut in the shape of kind of animal shapes, and I had smoked them over a fire, and they had a nice odor. They didn't want to show that, so we just didn't get any shows. So Peter said we could bring it to New York, and so we brought Great Canyon to New York, and it was all this contemporary work, these new ideas that we're cooking in, and so that's mostly what Peter did. He let us show Indian work that was contemporary, that we were all making. We had new ideas.
Well,
gave us that
I wanted
chance.
to just comment that there are Native actors that I see standing here that I saw in a great production about 2 weeks ago called Don't Feed the Indians. And there's people in here whose work I've only seen mostly in reproduction, but I admire the work that you're doing, and I'm encouraging you now. I really got a lot of energy from doing shows of these artists and having the opportunity to host them when they came here and maybe go to the community that they came from, whether it was in South Dakota or whether it was in New Mexico or wherever it was. They were always giving me energy, and that, naturally helps you as an artist, because now you've got, I don't know, a little bit of more strength to keep going and keep producing. And Jaune made many opportunities for us with some very, fine galleries in Santa Fe, and that was encouraging as well, to be able to, show with what I considered very, very good artists. And that's my main mission is show good art, show the best that we can get. And it's a struggle, because we always were dealing with a shoestring, the way we did everything. But it all seemed worthwhile, it really did. I wanted to tell one very short one, which is Lloyd, when I first met him, I was just really beginning to discover who I was, honestly. I had been making this journey back home, trying to put together what it meant to say, Onundawat gan ni ah, meaning I'm a person of the people of the Great Hill. What does that mean? It means you have a language. It means you have onkwe onweka. You have a way of life. You have belief. You have songs. You have dances. You have knowledge of medicine. You have art. You have tradition. All of this. You have ceremonial way of life. All of that. And I was just beginning to scratch the surface. And Lloyd said to me once, you should get in the car right now and drive to Six Nations, to the Onondaga Longhouse, and go to Gaiweo. And I did. I literally did that, which is a long drive from New York City to Six Nations on the other side of the river, on the Grand River. And I went to the Onondaga Longhouse, and I started going to hear a recitation of the Code of Handsome Lake, we call it. It's what we call our Gaiweo, or our good word. It was just the beginning for me, but that was something that Lloyd actually helped me to understand. Go home, take the strength of what is there now, learn from that, then you can do more things. And that was my guidance to people like Edgar Heapabirds. I said to him, go home, go back to your Cheyenne roots, learn, feel it, and that has been a great source for Edgar's work, as any of us know who knows Edgar. And it wasn't that he didn't know about it, because he certainly grew up in that, but to go back and to really, then make it part of your expression is very important, and I'm sure you've done that.
Yes, I have. And I continue to do so. Growing up in Alaska, I was really immersed in the Alaska Native cultures, and was always feeling very dislocated from Standing Rock and Keweenaw Bay, the Lakota and Ojibwe people. So whenever I would hear the drums and the singing of the Alaskan Native songs, it would always pull at my soul. So, but one of the things that I appreciated about getting to know Lloyd, and also getting to know the folks here on the discussion panel, is the grounding, and how important that grounding is, and going back to where you come from, to continually re-examine where you're going.
I think that it was that the other key element, which is really important, that was true for all of the artists, was people being grounded, and like Pete's saying, being either being grounded or becoming grounded in the traditional values. It wasn't about assimilation. It was about, again, having an individual vision as an artist and trying to bring that to life. But how people related to one another and how that came about was by being grounded in traditional values.
I know going back to, again, when I was in school and going through a lot of my own personal questioning of where I am, what am I doing, and what kind of imagery am I working with, what am I developing in my studio practice, and really questioning to the core a lot of that, just it was, and working outside of the paradigm or outside of the norm of what has become known in mainstream as what defines Native art, how do we define it? So I thought I had to do something very specific with that in my own work, and I found myself moving away from that, moving more toward an abstract language, and what helped me with that, with those my challenges with that, is going back and talking to folks on Standing Rock and saying, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't want to, I want to do what I'm supposed to be doing, and I want to do it in a good way, but I don't want to do it like this. And they always gave me great encouragement and a lot of support, and and continue to be grateful for folks back in the community to share with them where I am and what I'm doing. Just to stay connected.
This is important here in New York because these are people away from their tribal lands, people away from their communities, and when they come together, there's poetry, music, dance, theater. It used to be in Peter's gallery, and we used to have all those things going on, which is the old way for the Indian community in powwows and encampments. It used to be all mixed together, poetry, music, dance, theater. It was all of a piece. It didn't even have separate names. We didn't even have a name or a word for art. We didn't have a name or a word for poetry. It was all of a piece. Mm-hmm. So that brought us together, that whole thing that we needed so badly. Drumming and singing are part of it.
Right, yeah, Native culture, they don't compartmentalize. That's a mainstream thing. You don't, like you have a separate language for business and a separate language for personal life, and you can do certain things at certain times and not, and this and that. With Native culture, everything is completely integrated. It's all in one. We'd like to open it up and see if folks would like to have some questions, and we'll have that for a while, and then we have a surprise for you at the end, okay? Whenever we're finished with the questions, all right.
Yate, my name is Cheyenne Sky. I'm a student at the Fashion Institute of Technology for Art History and Museum Professions, specifically to get more representation of Native artists in bigger museums. I had an interesting conversation recently about decolonization and what it means to be decolonized and how we should use the word. So this is something I struggle with conceptually because to some people it's applied to like business and systems and government and things like that, to art as well. But to some people it's just a process of learning about themselves. So I'd really love to know your opinions on decolonization. And as an aside, I have a YouTube channel specifically dedicated to art. I'd love to interview you guys. Okay, enough of that.
I'm just going to take a real quick stab at that one. First of all, for me, I always have to refer to us as members of a nation, because I think of myself as a member of the Seneca Nation of Indians, okay? And Indians is just a term that they gave us. Of course, it's a misnomer. But, So the first thing is that my nation has treaties with the United States. I don't vote in state, national, or local elections. I don't serve on juries. When I mean the judicial system of the United States or the state of New York, I don't do those things. I run a museum which the state of New York helps to support. But at one point in time, they said to me, supposing the chief said this and we said that. I said, well, I don't have a choice. I have to go with what the chiefs say. And if that disqualifies me, then I'm disqualified. Then I can't do this. But they've always given me that free rein to do the work that I knew was important. And Jaune mentioned some of these things, like we lost a man and we needed someone to do repatriation, and I was standing there, and that became me. And I had no idea that would take up the next 20 years of my life, but it did. So in decolonizing, it's first of all understanding really who we are, really where we come from. What is our relationship to this country? What is our relationship to this land? And it doesn't have to be the entire source of your art. That's you. That's how you live. But then your art is something else. Art is coming from that, and it's coming from all the other streams that are flowing into your life that bring you happiness and bring you clarity and give you the ability to help other people see.
Talk about, Peter and I were advisors for the National Museum of the American Indian in the early days, and we had big ideas, Peter and I did. We had big ideas about how we wanted that to be.
I try to, stay within the bounds of truth, so that I'm not being too crazy. I've always been a person who doesn't like to sit around and talk about it. I'm the person who wants to sit around, wants to do it. I'm going to do it. And if it's hard, I'm going to definitely do it. The harder it is for me to do it, the harder I'm going to make it happen. I don't know why. I'm just driven that way. Maybe I inherited that from my iron-working father. I don't know. But that's my, sort of mantra is I can do it. I don't care. When I used to work for one of my relatives was ironworking in an all-Indian gang. He used to say, in Seneca, there is no such word as can't. It means you can do it, no matter how hard it seems. You take the hard thing first and you do that. Do the hardest thing first, and then everything else is easy. So when she says we had big ideas, yeah, always big ideas. Do it right.
Anybody else have any questions? I want to say anything?
Mario, don't just sit there.
Antonio, you have a question?
Yes, I have a two-part question. I'm interested in the social justice movements and how that influenced the Native American movement, specifically the occupation of Alcatraz. Were there any ricochet effects within the community to do tactics like occupation on the East Coast? And secondly, it's interesting, I was doing research on the Fort George in Lower Manhattan, where the Native American museum is, and it's actually on top of where Fort George was, which is the opposite of what you find in Mexico City, where the cathedrals are built on the Aztec temples and stuff like that.
If you look at the murals that are inside the customs house, you'll see the Indians paying court, down on their hands and knees, paying court to the guys, the ships, the money changers there. Where the museum is right now. Wow. If you look at the murals in there. Yeah, when we talk about colonized people.
I was living in San Francisco when Wounded Knee was occupied. I was working at Ghirardelli Square. So every day when I went out onto the pier there, I was looking at Alcatraz. I was there when the wall was painted red. I was there when Richard Oakes was hit over the head with a pool cue, and pretty much it finished him off. He did get back home, and but it started me really thinking. And then the next one was Kent State. Kent State, I don't know why, it just pissed me off. when they shot students like that, I became a part of a street theater group at San Francisco Art Institute. So, those things got me going, and then the occupation of Wounded Knee. Eventually, I knew all the AIM people. They stayed at my house. They came to the gallery. They did presentations. The political movement has been very important, and it has helped to raise consciousness, just like Standing Rock did, for so many different people around the world who had disconnected from, our reality.
There's an organization out in Martin, South Dakota called, the acronym is CAIRNS. It's the Center for American Indian Research and Native Studies. And this upcoming spring, they're organizing an exhibition looking at Wounded Knee, the first massacre in the 1800s. So it's going to look at that. It's going to be looking at all of the events that led up to the first Wounded Knee and subsequent events, the Wounded Knee 2 in the 70s. And it'll be traveling around the Plain States over the next year or two.
You mentioned Alcatraz, and specifically there was a reaction to Alcatraz. There were 3 women that were involved in it, and then there was another group that was also part of it, and they were the ones that were written about in the Times, called the Indian Six. But it's actually, anyway, it was organized. Everyone threw some paint on the statue at TR there along, in front of the Natural History Museum, that statue there. But it was a demo. The person who organized it was a woman named Rosemary Wood, who is Osage from home. And so Rosemary did it because it was in I can't remember, it was 71, I believe it was 72. Anyway, it was even at that late date, the American government was still lying to the Indian people and breaking treaties with them. And so she wanted to do something that brought attention to this, because this was mentioned in the back pages of the New York Times. And what was on the front page was all about President Nixon's daughter getting married. And so the people were driving down the street and they saw the statue, and it was low-hanging fruit, and so they did something. And Rosemary wanted to write Alcatraz on it in white on top of the red paint, but she's dyslexic, couldn't do it in time, and so some people stayed around and did it. And anyway, then the police showed up, and that's another story. But anyway, there were people that were reacting here strongly about it. But what really motivated, what made her galvanize everybody was because that even at that late date, that the Indian people were still being subjected to these things happening. So.
I'm an artist under the great umbrella, a theater artist. And the theater, as a child, when you talk about the culture and how it affects children, as a Native artist, my people, my family, we were performing before I was born, and the family did. And it's hard for me to break apart painting, acting, singing, because we do have an exercise we call sound and movement, and all that comes from the image that the painter uses, the sound that the actor uses. And as a child, I remember reacting to that. Our family would go places and sit under American flags with people, a chorus singing the national anthem. And this was the family. This was the native family. And it was so wrong. It was so, and to my being. So that coming back now to the cultural, what do they call it again? The empowerment or it is so embedded in people who are working as artists that sometimes you have to think, are you yourself, how you are affected by what the culture says you are. And you have to study that and examine that and work on it. That being an actor is very healing in that sense, because you know where your family comes from, you know the different cultures. And in my home, when we were children, there was a rodeo, that's theater. So these people were stranded in New York, and my father used to invite them into our home. And in the evening, there were people from all over, Canada, Central, South America, Northern, singing, dancing. And that grew in me as knowing the indigenous, the people of our community, the people of our country, the people of the different countries. And there's so much to learn, there's so much I think to be an actor, you can act forever, because there's so much in there, as well as the painting, because I think at first when I'm writing a piece, I think of the image. I go from the image. Where does the painter go from? I go from the image, my sound, my movement, my people's sound and movement. And there's so much to work on. And I just had to say that in the book was mentioned the theater, and it's still going on. We're still performing. Since October, November, December, I had a little job in pieces, and I was just so happy because I was touching every base, every feeling in every bone. You know, it's just saying, I'm so proud of my Indianness and my culture and my art.
Yes.
You know, and it can go on forever and ever and ever.
It's the story.
And the fight and how to fight and to realize this is what people would say to us in Spider Woman Theater. I enjoyed your work, but I expected to hear flute and hear songs and dances. You made me cry, you know. And I said, good, you know, because this is like an iceberg. Our stories haven't come out. Our paintings haven't come out completely.
Yes, they are.
And there's so much, and that's why I enjoy listening and talking to the different aspects, the different dimensions of art in the native world.
Yeah.
And it's just
It's all
the
about the
beginning.
story, Gloria.
Just
The story.
Just the story
that's what it's all.
alone.
That's everything that we do is about the story.
And then us,
Yeah.
each individual,
Yes.
from way back.
Exactly.
From way back.
Yes.
And I went back to Kuniyal, where my father came
Yeah.
from. I learned so much. I learned that the mola tells a story.
Yeah.
The mola itself tells a story.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's so beautiful, it's so great, and it's so exciting, and I love it. And
Yeah.
I'm so glad I'm an actor, an artist, and I hope I die on stage.
Thank you, Gloria. That was inspiring. Gloria, that was really beautiful and inspiring, because it just made me want to say, you see how these two ladies were talking? This is how it is. And Gloria's right, because all the Native artists know this, that when you in school, when you go to write something or to paint something or create something, like your teachers will tell you, well, that's nice, but it's too Indian. And so you're constantly being measured by how much you've assimilated or how close you come to this ideal, this supposed ideal, which is that of the white culture, the mainstream culture, where you tell a story. Well, there's too many Indians in it. You know, you need to change it. Or those people saying, well, you're not supposed to do that. Well, and all of these are false narratives, but you hear that from the time that you're really small. You know, trying to change you into something else rather than people being able to just be the best whoever they are. And all these artists that are in that book, and the story of all of this is about people who didn't accept that, who never even didn't listen to that. And they decided that by the sheer force of their will and the belief in themselves, that they were gonna do something that was them.
Yes, that's right.
Truly who they were.
That's why we have to come together, because we reinforce each other. That's why we do what we do.
Well, I guess you talk loud. We spend our entire lives as Indians denying ourselves and trying to be white. And then when we get into school and we study art and we make art, then our professors tell us, how is this native? How is this work Indian? It doesn't look Indian to me. There's no feathers in it. You know, how do you identify with that?
This is my son speaking. He's the chair of the art department at the Institute of American Indian Art College in Santa Fe. And so he was a little boy here when I brought him to New York to meet all of these people in the early days. So he grew up with Native Americans moving in and out of our house and living with us at times, and now he's a middle-aged man.
I have a quick question. It's so wonderful to see all of you up there, and my family. But one of the questions I have that's been coming across a lot, and I think that art, visual art, performing arts are all in the same. There's no blurred lines because there's really no word for the blurred lines within the cultural diversity that we all work from. But the question I have for all of you really, and this is why I'm asking it, is what about audience building? And we find that a lot that's happening. You find it certainly in theater that Native peoples do come to the show and understand the show and support the show. But a lot of times these institutions, no matter what it is, production institutions, museum institutions, even down to clinics, don't understand the audience and don't understand audience building. The suggestion that was made, and what I feel might be the correct suggestion, and I'm asking all of you, is the suggestion that further education is needed before they even get to the production, meaning that the education has to start on Native issues, particularly in arts. Should it be starting in an institution, as in Yale, and not being compartmentalized into all these different places? So by the time they come, we are building those audiences. They're understanding where we're coming from and what that means. So we do not get the racist comments of, you weren't Indian enough. They didn't look Indian. You looked very Jewish. You looked very Italian. How come you don't tell a real Indian story? What is your take on that? I know my take on it as a theater person, but what is your take on it as visual artists and curators?
I went to the Museum of Modern Art today and I looked at the children's book section. There wasn't one, not even one, children's book that I could take home. I'm raising my grandchildren. There isn't one book that I could take home to my granddaughters. Not one. On Native America, not one. I think there was one African American. That was it. But nothing on Native America. This is part of our issue here. Is lack of education in this country.
I've spent almost 32 years running Ganondagan, and the last 2 years in the Seneca Art and Culture Center. And so for a good part of the last 30 years, I've been talking to, I don't know how many fourth graders and their parents. I let my staff do most of the work with the fourth graders. I work on the parents. Because when I am working with the parents, I know I'm not preaching to the choir. You know, they are there, and whether they like it or not, I'm going to educate them while they're there with their children, and educate their teachers while they're there with their children or their students. So it's a never-ending process, really. It's very difficult because, you know, what the good news, Muriel, is I've had the situation where a PhD came into the center with her class. She had come to Unholding when she was in fourth grade. So maybe I made a little progress in that one corner, right? That some young woman understood and found, you know, meaning in doing this. But I think we are still at that stage where we're working with the museums and attempting to bring them along out of this maze that they're in, which is they have to deal with who will pay for what exhibit, so therefore they can't show Indians because their patrons don't want to pay for an Indian exhibit, or it's too segregated, or it's too something or other, whatever it might be. So, you know, I'm encouraged. I was here about, I don't know what it was, 2 weeks ago. There were some people from the Met. There were some people from the Whitney there. I think we have some in the audience tonight. And I'm hoping they're hearing what we're saying, which is it's time to open the doors. The United States is so far behind the rest of the world. It's so far behind New Zealand, behind, you know, Australia, in terms of Canada. Canada, the support for Native artists, First Nations artists is fantastic. We get nothing, literally. The amount we get is next to nothing for the support of our art.
I think I was just thinking if you are, I think it's in visual arts the same thing. It depends on what is the artist, what kind of market or audience is the artist performing, you know, reacting to. What does he need at the time? Does the artist need to make money? In which case, if you're talking, in my opinion, if you're talking visual or performing arts, to what degree is the piece going to be understandable to a general audience that doesn't have a clue? You know, I mean, maybe you have to have different kinds of work that will appeal to different audiences. Sometimes artists are, it's a paradox because I think you need to make money, you need to sell, or you need to sell tickets, or you need to sell artwork. So you have to figure out what is the what is going to be attractive to the market that you're appealing to. If you're doing, you know, arts and crafts, more traditional arts like basket making or whatever, and you going the powwow circuit or the arts and crafts circuit, the type of work you do for that venue is not the same that you're going to be putting into a gallery, a museum. But on the other hand, you have to, so many variables there, you know, how universal and understandable is it going to be to a general audience that doesn't know Native Americans from a hole in the head, you know, all they know is movies and TV. But on the other hand, the other thing would be maybe for a Native audience that knows the inside jokes, that knows all the history, the piece that you're putting together has to be changed for that group. So it varies. I think it's not cast in stone. You know.
I think it's really important. This is something I feel strongly about in the performing arts and in film and what have you, that it's really important that you as the individual artist really stick to the story that's in your heart that you want to tell, okay? Because people in the mainstream, they don't make excuses when they want to do something if we don't understand it, okay? They do what they want to do, okay? And they can label us with whatever labels that they want to label us, okay? No, you can't stop that. But it's our job to keep on doing what we are called to do and to do that the very best that we can. And it's not it's experimental, it's exotic, or all this other stuff that avant-garde or whatever it is they want to say. Just push through all of that and just keep on doing it. And it will find an audience because the utter truthfulness of it is what draws people in. And that's the part of it that is inspired. So.
I think also, you know, the more writers, Native American writers you can get, the better. The more Native curators, Native historians, people that are within the culture that are able to communicate to an audience, the better. Because if you find in the visual arts, tried to put some of that in the book, is that seemingly most of the curators, writers, and gallery owners and all of these people, they have created over the past century all of the theories and all of the ideas and conceptions that they have to try to understand Native American art. A lot of it is not accurate. You know, it's either accurate or distorted, or maybe they are well-minded, well-intentioned, whatever it is. But again, it's just being defined from outside the culture rather than people from inside the culture. And I think you can only have the more people that can communicate from within the culture to other people, the better, because you're always going to get seemingly the majority of people interpreting things that's not correct. You know, that they're in the position to do it, but you still have to deal with a lot of wrong understanding there.
David, I agree with what you just said. I think if we go back to the turn of the century when the government kind of took over Indian art, pots, blankets, and jewelry became the stereotype. We became a stereotype in Hollywood. So you put all that together, and what they look for is a stereotype. And we can't deliver that. And if we're contemporary, we're doing all these different things, and we're not following the stereotype. So the museums lose patience with this because we're too difficult to figure out. And when I talked to Rick West in the early days, when they were building the new museum, he said to me, all the white collectors out there who have the collections have pots, blankets, and jewelry. That's what they want to donate to the museum, not contemporary art. All their money is in the market. So you take some galleries here in New York and the underground black market for Native American goods, and you put that all together, there is a market and there's an investment, a major investment by these collectors. And then you add the white anthropologists to that who tell our story in their way, and there's so many mistakes in those books. So then you put that together, and then they're like replicons. You know, they're turning out more white anthropologists than they are Native American. They don't look for the Native Americans because they cause trouble, because we are trouble, because we say things that they don't like us to say. So, okay, so you put that together, so now we have replicons of these anthropologists. And I hope they're not in this room because they don't like what I say. But that's our problem. That's where education is faltering. That's where our stories don't get out. That's where museums don't want to deal with us because we're in trouble.
There's a lot of things being said here, and it seems that even from the beginning that the flow of the conversation and the discussion is being moved towards the direction of, in all aspects of Native art, Native American art, is where how does it continue to grow and persevere into the future, and. Speaking of, like, for example, in the book, in No Reservation, where it details the origins and roots of the Native American arts movement in New York, which also seems to, well, very clearly line up with the American Indian movement, you know, which began in the 60s, you know, with the occupations of Alcatraz and AIM, and so to what degree the American arts movement was compelled and propelled by what was happening at that time in the political movement, in the social awareness of Native Americans through the various movements. How much was that actually the fuel that was driving Native American artists in all the various disciplines to engage the public. And in this, what I would probably refer to as this, post-Native American era, Native American movement era, the question then seems to be, how does with the well, there's still elements of like, say, for example, with Standing Rock and other issues that come to the fore in the public awareness of Native American issues. But I guess the question is that and also, I guess, not only in terms of that era, in the civil rights era, 60s, early 70s, that was bringing a lot of issues and awareness to the fore of the American public and to the world. That it was also not just galvanizing Native American artists, but also, to a degree, galvanizing the American public into recognizing and taking an interest, I think back then you probably saw a lot more awareness and interest generally in American audiences for Native art, because I think it was just permeating the culture more. So I guess the question would be, how can Native American artists and the movement of Native American artists, which is detailed in the book, I think very, very clearly and brilliantly, is how does it move forward as the American Indian movement to a greater or lesser extent has declined politically, or at least evolved in some ways, but is not necessarily as pervasively prevalent in the American consciousness. So I guess maybe that would be if that's a comment or commentary or an observation or a question that can be kind of tossed around. You know what I mean? Hope I wasn't too verbose.
I think, just thinking what one of the things Diane mentioned earlier about compartmentalizing everything into isms, for example, or trying to define a movement or define a design or trying to define a theory or something. This is something that, to me, was imposed a great deal on Native American art. And one of the things I think I found in the research was having to do with the diversity. Well, that's one of the ideas we had about the movement here in New York, such great diversity of thought, theory, design, and style and everything else, that people should have the freedom to progress the way that they want and to communicate their own ideas and not be confined into maybe a movement or an ism within a movement. One of the, so that it can be somehow analyzed more easily or compartmentalized or whatever it is. One of the very well-known writer, Dory Ashton, we interviewed in the book. She's about 95 years old. She knew everybody, in the abstract New York School art movement. She wrote a lot of books analyzing in detail all of these people. And they've been written about, hundreds of books have been written about these people and all of their various movements and styles, And she said, you get to know the artists themselves. She knew them all personally. They were not that caught up in trying to define their, what kind of movement they fit in, what kind of ism or what that it was. There's expressionism or whatever it is, conceptualism. They were more interested in just expressing their soul, and expressing their desire to communicate, and that's one of the things I thought was so funny, because you have all of these great scholars coming out trying to define these people, imposing their own mindset. Especially you find that in Native American art, where they would take a carving or a painting out of its original context, and then put it on a wall in a gallery, especially if you're talking about a ceremonial item or something of that nature, and it happened, in all the big museums, you put it on a gallery wall, and then they tried to analyze what's universal about the design and all of this. One of the things was that they never asked the person that carved it, what did he have in mind? What did the native person have? What was the original context of the piece, So I just think, people need to have the freedom to express themselves and not be so caught up in trying to compartmentalize like it has been done, like you're saying, before the post modernism or whatever, that should have the freedom. I think one of the scholars mentioned that. I mean, worldwide now, there should be the people should accept all the cultures that want to put their work forward on the basis that they can and understand as best they can, and not try to compartmentalize it as much, which I think limits the experience.
I think if, I'm sorry, you have one more thing to say then?
Just one thing. Right, just one thing. And I was talking with my cousin about some of these things, and he writes, we must remain vigilant for the sake of our future generations to come, always. In terms of what? Dropped all over Santa Fe. But yeah, the folks out in Standing Rock, they're holding fast and they're remaining vigilant and they're taking risks. And I think that's what a lot of it has to do. I mean, being truthful to yourself and who you are and where you come from, but also showing some fearlessness and taking some risks. And are the institutions out there taking risks in supporting Native artists?
Before we go any further, we have a little surprise here, and then everyone's free to ask questions or talk as they wish. But at this time, I'd like to ask Kevin Tarrant and Steve Thornton to come up front here. David, we'd like for you to come on up front here and stand up with your mic.
I think I'll do the blanket.
Okay, all right. So let you.
I'm Steve Thornton. I'm Osage and Cherokee, and I'm Oklahoma, and I come to honor people, to give them blankets and dances and for different things, the veterans or the elder, or someone does something good for the people. They give them a blanket, and sometimes I make a song for them. So my relatives got songs. My great grandfather has his song. I give them the honor songs, and now I'm gonna give Dave a blanket. And, that's what they do back home. Thank you for the voting. For all the stuff you do. Thank you. My uncle said, thank you is a simple word, but it has a lot of meaning. It's true.
So I was asked to sing this honor song for David. This particular song I'm going to sing tonight is called Moving On. And it's a song that was written when one of our members lost a family member. One of our members of our group called Silver Cloud Singers. And it's kind of appropriate because the things we're talking about tonight and the people that are no longer here, we're the ones that are left behind. We're the ones that have to carry that burden and move forward, like you guys said, Gloria and the rest, because we're the ones who have to keep going. So they're not here anymore, but we have to keep that struggle going. Be vigilant, like was said. So I'm going to sing this honor, everybody. If you're able, I'm going to ask that you please rise, and gentlemen, if you can, move your hats. But if not, please feel free to sit.
Hey,
Thank you.
Now, if anyone else wants to talk about anything, or do people want to visit, or have a glass of wine before we go, or whatever, it's up to everybody what they want to do now. So.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you, everyone. Please do stick around for a drink or finish the cookies, so thank you.